quilty friends, it's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber, and today I get to introduce you to a ruler that I have been working on for over 6 months. I'm so excited about this. I came up with this idea, back in 2019, and I finally have gotten to make an entire ruler that makes everything you see behind me and so much more. I'm going to show you the ruler, I'm going to show you the quilt patterns that I have made to go with this ruler, and I'm going to show you how it works. You ready? Let's get started. Alright friends, this is the diamond strip ruler. Because it's a clear acrylic ruler, it's not easy for you to see, but we will be showing it on fabric. I will show you how it works. But it is a 6-inch wide by 24-inch tall ruler that has vertical lines for cutting strips and diagonal lines for cutting diamonds, which is why it's called the diamond strip ruler, because it is designed to help you cut your diamonds into sets of strips. And that makes piecing diamond quilts super easy. Traditionally, when we make a diamond quilt, we cut all of our diamond pieces, which means we have lots of bias edges. We sew those diamonds together, hoping that we're not stretching those bias edges. And it's a fairly tedious process. But with this, we get to cut our strips using the diamond strip ruler. And then we get to take those strips, sew them together, so there's no bias edges yet. And then once we have them sewn together, then we cut them up into segments that are diamond segments. Then and only then do we have bias edges, but we already have usually at least a quarter of our quilt already pieced together, sometimes more. These are the instructions that come with the ruler. This is the second ruler that I designed. The first is the box bag template. This is the diamond strip ruler. And just like I did with the box bag template, I gave you a pattern. I've been quilting for over 30 years, and nothing drives me crazier than buying a specialty tool and then needing to buy a pattern to be able to use that specialty tool. So when I design a specialty tool, I give you a pattern right in the packaging. So these are your instructions, and they take you through how to use the diamond strip ruler. I've given you measurements. We'll talk about those in a little bit. And then inside, I've given you full instructions for making a mini quilt, and I actually have a sample of that mini quilt here. There she is. So here is a sample of the mini quilt that I made using the diamond strip ruler. Be on the lookout for a full video tutorial on putting this together. I pieced this entire mini quilt, and yes, those were 1-inch finished diamonds. The entire mini quilt in about 5 hours. Which for 1-inch diamonds and how precise and this should be, it comes together so easy because we're able to make these in strip sets. Also, this is a fat quarter friendly pattern. So get out your fat quarters, find a fun gradient from them, and make yourself a mini quilt. Okay, so the pattern for this quilt is right in the instructions, and there's my picture of the finished quilt. So you need 5 fat quarters and your diamond strip ruler to make this quilt. Okay, let's show some of the other quilts that I made using the diamond strip ruler. I really wanted you to see how versatile this is. So we have our Lone Star, extended Lone Star pattern here, or our Lone Star gradient quilt. All right. This is a pattern. Let me just make sure I'm doing it right side up. Yep, this is a pattern called scales. And so these can be snake scales, they can be mermaid scales, they can be dragon scales, they can be whatever kind of scales you want. That this pattern is called scales. And this one is a beginner friendly pattern. Whenever you're dealing with bias edges, so that would be any diamond quilt, always want to make sure that you starch your fabric, and I do have a video to show you how I starch my fabrics. You always want to make sure that you starch your fabrics when working with diamonds, but other than that, this one, still beginner friendly pattern. Okay, let me grab another beginner friendly pattern. Okay, This quilt is Peppermint Stripe, and Peppermint Stripe is a beginner-friendly pattern again. This comes together in a day. Very easy to make this entire quilt in a day. One of your days, not just one of my days. I can make this quilt in an afternoon. It's really pretty quick. And the pattern is super simple. I love this quilt. You can make it in all different kinds of colorways. It has that just great like chevron zigzag with different widths of strips to add a lot of interest. So this is called Peppermint Stripe. You know I had to make you a scrappy quilt, and so I did. This one is called the Diamond 9 Patch, and so it has these 9 patch diamonds, and I have some of these blocks behind me. So these 9 patch diamond blocks are made in sets of 3 that then come together and then are stitched together with background diamonds to make almost an Irish chain kind of zigzag, fun, interesting look. I love that. And then you'll notice with this quilt, as well as Peppermint Stripe, it has a zigzag border at the top. With both these quilts, you could absolutely trim that off, but it is super easy to be able to bind this zigzag border. You may have noticed recently I did a video on bias binding because you need bias binding to be able to do these inset corners right here. And then next week I have a video going up showing you how easy it is to be able to bind an inset corner. You will be amazed how simple it is to do. And so you'll want to bind these zigzags because it looks cool and people are like, oh my gosh, did you do that? Yes, I did. And it wasn't hard. But you don't have to tell them it's hard. You can tell them it's hard if they're not a quilter. If they are a quilter though, tell them it's easy, show them the video, and that way they can do zigzag bindings themselves. All right, that was 3 quilts, which means I have some more to show you. This one is called Medallion. This is a variation on a log cabin. So this one is trimmed up with a diamond strip ruler rather than being sewn in strips. It's sewn on one strip at a time and trimmed up using the diamond strip ruler. It's a really fun, really impactful version of a log cabin block or a log cabin quilt. Super fun. So I've got here some examples of these log cabin diamonds behind me. Love doing this. So you take your dark fabrics, your light fabrics, your center. The traditional log cabin has a red center for the heart of the log cabin. And then you make your log cabin. Okay. And then the last one I have here behind me tucked away. So we're going to go ahead and pull this one out. This one is extra special because it's also the very first quilt ever that I long armed on my new long arm. And this one is called Diamond Lattice. Diamond Lattice is an intermediate quilt pattern because there is such small pieces and there is a lot of sewn on the bias. So small pieces on the bias, I would not recommend this for a beginner. The Diamond Lattice quilt is definitely an intermediate quilt pattern because it has such small piecing and it's on the bias. I would recommend that not for a beginner, but more for an intermediate quilter. The Medallion quilt is for, it's not a first quilt. It's definitely for a confident beginner at the very least. But I definitely gave you a full range of patterns from beginner to more advanced. And I can't wait to see the quilts that y'all make with these patterns and with this ruler. Now that you've seen the variety of quilts that this ruler makes, let's actually play with the ruler so I can show you how it works. I have 2 pieces of fabric here, and I'm lining up this edge here. We'll break it down. See how much this fabric can actually fit in our frame. Let's see the top edge. The top edge isn't necessarily lined up with anything. I just wanted one edge that was lined up with the lines on my mat. And I'm going to take the ruler. Now the ruler has down here at the bottom and also up here at the top a straight line that is perpendicular to these lines. And that is so that you can take that line and line it up with the straight edge on your fabric. There we go. And now I'm just going to square off the end. If you're left-handed, you would do this on the other side. I'm right-handed and I do it on this side. Now I'm just going to go ahead and take the whole mat and turn it around because that's just what's easier for me. You can walk to the other side of the table. You can rotate your fabric. That's also fine. And now I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to cut 4.5-inch strips. So I can line that 4.5-inch edge here. And then we can see at the top, I'm lining up that 4.5-inch. We can see here at the top, I'm lining up the non-parallel to the perpendicular line. Here at the top, I've got all my big parallel lines going straight up and down. And I cut my 4.5-inch strip. Bring this back up so I can fit on my table a little better. And in this case, I'm just going to cut a bunch of 4.5-inch strips. Now this is a 6-inch wide ruler, so it will cut strips as big as 6 inches just for the lines on the ruler. But if you need to cut a 6.5-inch strip, you just use the line on your mat. So I'm going to line this up with the 1/2 inch on my mat. And I can line the edge of the ruler up with the 1/2 inch on the mat. And this way I could cut a 6.5-inch strip if that's what I wanted. Oh, and I didn't catch this end. There we go. So that is cutting your pieces with the diamond strip ruler, cutting your strips. It makes a great strip cutting ruler for strips as big as 6 inches. If you just want the lines on the ruler, and with the lines on your mat, you can cut much, much bigger strips. The next step is to sew these strips together. Now, when we sew strips together, we're used to taking our strips and sewing them just right next to each other, lining up this top edge. We are not going to do that with the diamond strip ruler. We want to offset them. So remember that chart that I said was in our instructions right here? So I have a chart that tells you how much to offset your strips based on how wide your strips are. And if you use any of my patterns or any of the quilts that I showed you, the pattern will actually tell you exactly how much to offset the strip. So if you're using a pattern, you don't need this. But if you're playing on your own with diamonds, you will want this to be able to know how much to offset the strip. Now, if you ever lose these instructions, I have them on my website. I have a link down below. They're also in my shop link. In the shop listing, I have the instructions. So there is lots of places that you can find them online in case you ever lose these, but it comes with the ruler as well. Okay, so for 4.5-inch strips, I need to offset by 2.5 inches. And here's how we do that. I'm going to take my strips and so you just line it up with anything. It can be here on the mat. I find that easiest, but you could also use the ruler itself and line up 1, 2.5. And now you've offset the strips. Depending on which way you're cutting your strips, you will need to offset them one up or one down. And that's always in the images, whether you're doing a right leaning set of strips or a left leaning set of strips. I guess for you, that's a right leaning set of strips or a left leaning set of strips because you're looking at, anyway, because we're facing each other. All right. And then the thing that I didn't mention when we were looking at the ruler is that the top has all of your whole inches on there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the bottom has all of your 1/2 inches on there, 1/2, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5. So you can find those measurements. And we decided not to do dashed lines on this because there are a lot of lines going on, and too many lines, it gets confusing. But if you want to highlight a specific line on the ruler, glow line tape is perfect for putting right on the ruler. And that way you can easily know which strip you're cutting from the lines on the ruler. Okay, we've offset our strips. Now we're going to sew them together. I'm just sewing these together with a standard 1/4 inch seam allowance. So reading glasses on and press your foot down And then we just, so we don't have to start at the very beginning. We start at the beginning of this strip, not at the beginning of the bottom strip. And so all the way down. When you're doing diamond quilts, the best rule of thumb is when in doubt, press open. I know some of y'all are not big fans of pressing open. The biggest reason not to press open is because you want to stitch in the ditch. So the biggest tip is don't stitch in the ditch. There's lots of really fun quilting designs out there that aren't stitch in the ditch. So press open so you don't have issues with bulk at your diamond points, and don't stitch in the ditch because there is no ditch when you press open. So we press these open, and then we can go ahead and add more strips. Now I already have a strip set that I finished here. So I have 4 strips, and we can cut these all at once, and you can see how easy it is to do diamonds. So here's my diamond strip ruler on my fabric, and now you can see those fuchsia colored diagonal lines, and you can see why we did this offset, because doing this offset means that you don't lose as much of your fabric. So I can take these diagonal lines and I can line them up on my seams. Now a traditional strip cutting ruler will often have one of these lines, so you could do this with a traditional ruler with one of the lines, but this is where the diamond strip ruler is so fabulous, is because it has lines every ½ inch, so you can see to line up in multiple spots. If I were just to line up in one spot, I might not get as accurate. So I'm double checking all of them, getting them all lined up, and now I can cut to square off this end. Then I can flip this over, and I can cut a 4½ inch strip. And when I cut this 4½ inch strip, I can again line up my diagonal lines with my seam lines. And now I have a strip of 4 diamonds that have already been pieced together. So I can do multiple sets like this, and this is just with fat quarter strips. You can do full 40-inch yardage strips of fabric and get so many diamonds all at once. I'm going to go ahead and cut another one. So same thing, I'm going to line up with my 4½ inch. I'm going to line up those fuchsia colored diagonal lines. Cut. And from this set of fat quarter strips, I'm able to cut 3 4½ inch strips. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut one more. There we go. And then you do have some scrap. Use scrap tape. If you're not already familiar with scrap tape, go find my video. Scrap tape's amazing. These scraps work great on scrap tape. But I have now 3 of these diamond strip sets that I'm going to piece together. I'm going to show you how to do that. There is a little trick that we use when piecing together diamond strip sets. All right, I'm just flipping them one upside down from the other, because if I were to sew them like this, they would just line up and that'd be boring. So we're just going to flip one and then the other. Now we want it so that this diagonal line goes right across. Now if we line up our 2 edges of our 2 diamonds so that this point and this point line up, what's going to happen down here is that this seam line and this seam line will line up at the seams. And we don't want the seam lines to line up at the seams right here on the edge. We actually want them to line up a 1/4 inch in. And so that our points when we've sewn everything together all line up. So we don't want to line up these 2 edges. What we actually want to do, and I'm going to bring this down. What we actually want to do is we want this edge to line up at the 1/4 inch. See that 1/4 inch? And you'll get really used to doing this. And then this one also to line up at that 1/4 inch. So a 1/4 inch in, and this is really easy to do at your sewing machine because you're just going to bring these 2 pieces up to your sewing machine, and your needle should start right there with the edge of your 1/4 inch foot right here. It's a really easy measurement to do at your sewing machine. And now if I'm sewing a 1/4 inch in, you'll see that those points line up, and they'll line up all the way down if we've done it right. Now the way that you can check if you've done it right as you go down is that this is a 1/4 inch seam allowance, this pressed open 1/4 inch seam allowance. So the edge of this right here should line up with that seam. So the seam is going to line up with one of these depending on which way the seam goes, but the edge of a seam will line up with the edge of a seam allowance will line up with the seam below it. So we'll look at this one down here too. The edge of this seam allowance should line up right with that seam, and it does. So that's how you can double check it as you're sewing all the way down. So let's take it to the sewing machine and we'll sew this set. And of course it's shifting a little bit while I'm bringing it to the sewing machine, so I'm going to readjust it. And that needle should hit right at that V of the top fabric and the bottom fabric. And I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I should be able to see, because at this point we're sewing bias edges, so we don't want it to stretch. So I'm very gently handling the fabric. I'm not pulling anything from the back. I'm guiding it in, and I'm making sure that everything gets lined up. If you like using pins, you can absolutely pin these. I just tend not to use pins. And again, I'm guiding it from the back. I'm not pulling it through. And then I've got one last one. I'm going to line it up. Bring it to the back. All the way. And then when I finish right here, I've got that V notch again, and that needle should end right in that V notch. So let's see how we did. Let's bring this over. You can open this up. This one's off by like about a thread. I'm fine with that. That one looks perfect dead on. That one looks pretty darn good as well. So now I can take this and I can press it. And here I'm finger pressing, but I would absolutely press this with an iron. I'm just going to finger press it to prep it for pressing open. Looks like one of my seams did flip right here. I could go unpick this, but that's actually the seam that's perfect, so I'm leaving that one alone. And I'll just have a flip seam in the back. But there we go, we have our diamond units. All right, friends, that is the diamond strip ruler and how you use it to make amazing diamond quilts. I already have 6 patterns because the ruler comes with a pattern, as well as 5 other patterns for you to get started having so much fun with this ruler. You never knew the diamonds were this versatile and that you can do so much, and they're such an interesting shape. Stay tuned for more videos, including a step-by-step tutorial on how to make that insert pattern, a video on how to do the bindings for your zigzag bindings, and let me know what other videos you'd like to see about diamonds. I think that diamonds are the most interesting, fun shape. We do so many squares and rectangles and half square triangles in quilting, and they're great. But jumping over to diamonds with that, it's just so much fun. My friends, if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. I don't want you to miss any of the quilting videos that I have coming up for you. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up. That lets other people and YouTube know that it's a good video. And I'm going to be looking for all your questions, comments, and excitement down in the description. That's it for today, my friends. I will see you right here real soon. Bye for now.